rather than intimidating, because anytime you're telling a story, you are creating. And this is a very sacred thing. You know, storytelling is how we communicate. It's how our ancestors told each other where the food was. It's how they explained where danger was. This is how storytelling came to be. And now that we are further along in our societies, storytelling becomes more of a, like, I went to Japan and I saw this. A lot of the stories we tell now are about travel and the places we've been, because society has become something different than when there were lions, tigers, and bears out in the wild and we had to warn each other about those things. So beginning and end, those are going to be the points that you should probably focus on the most. And let me just share that I'm about to release our 75th podcast, number 75. And every time I head into a new story, oh, thank you. Every time I head into a new story, I'm facing all of the challenges that I just mentioned to you. So every time. And that means that that sort of levels the playing field, because every story has to hit on these points. It has to have a beginning. It has to have an end. What do you do in the middle? That's up to you, but that's often, you know, let's call it the meat inside of the sandwich. That's often the most interesting part. But how do you frame it? So those are just some points that I wanted to highlight in order for you guys to get a sense of how stories get told. You know, Shakespeare had to walk through these same bits, as does perhaps your favorite storyteller on whatever TV shows you guys enjoy. I will say that audio is a lot more forgiving than a video, right? You have more options. You can add the sound of a car going down the streets if you're talking about a local store or something like that. And I mean, let's be honest, sound effects are more advanced. You guys aren't there yet, but you have a very powerful instrument, and that is your own voice. Again, no one has your voice, and that's two things. That's your actual voice, like the one I'm using to talk to you right now, but that's also the voice of the voice of the story that you're telling. And you have control over those things. You have control if you're speaking super fast and the audience can't understand you anymore, or if you're speaking too slow and now the audience is bored. So you get to decide sort of the rhythm. So I would think about it almost musically from time to time. But with all of this that I've just said, it's most important to enjoy yourself, to find a way that this isn't some brutal homework assignment, but rather an opportunity to explore yourself as a storyteller, but also to highlight your community, which I think it's a great project. When I was your age, such projects were just not available. So consider yourself lucky that your teacher is challenging you in this way. Yeah, I'm doing all the talking. Are there questions I can answer? Where do you want to go from here, Sherry?
Oh, Paul, this has been great. Thank you, thank you. Hey, so the kids have some questions, and I'm gonna see which child would like to come visit with you first. So, who would like to? Okay, Capri, come on up. Nope, because remember I couldn't find them. Wait, there you go. Come stand right here and look at this computer right here. Okay.
So, we were wondering what is the
Put your mask down. Say a question.
We were wondering what is the writing process before you record the podcast? Do you write a script?
Do I write a script? Yes, I do. And Well, for me, there's the actual interview that I do with someone else, and then there's the introduction. And I definitely write a script for the introduction. And I think this is important because how we write and how we talk are two different things. I would say how we write can often be more formal than how we talk. And when you write out your script and then read it out loud, you'll be able to understand if you're more on the side of this is how somebody writes or this is how somebody talks. And you want to find sort of the middle ground there so that the information that you want to share is in there, but also that you still sound like someone who's speaking and having a conversation rather than someone who's reading from a book. And writing it down allows me to say it out loud, hear it, and then make the decision of whether I need to change anything.
So as we've been listening to some of your podcasts, Paul, because I had a chance to spend a little bit of time with you in Antarctica, I hear your storytelling voice because you did that so well on our expedition. But guys, I want to ask you, when you listened to Meet the Ocean, did you feel like Paul was telling you a story, or do you feel like he was reading a chapter out of a book?
Telling a story.
Telling a story. So that's a big difference in a podcast versus just maybe an audiobook, right? And that's what makes the connection. At first, I thought the connection was just strong because of my association with Paul and our experience together. But I feel like the connection could be with anybody if you use that type of voice. So thank you for sharing that. Bradley, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah. What does your recording setup look like when you're recording the podcast?
Good question. This depends on where I am. So if I'm outside and there's a lot of animals around, I will have a field recorder, and this has something that covers the microphone that allows it to still record in high wind. Because if I didn't have that cover, you'd get all that background noise of the wind and you wouldn't get clear audio. But when I am inside and I'm talking to someone, I have 2 microphone stands. I have a pretty fancy recorder that you can plug in 4 microphones to. So if I wanted to interview that many people at a time, I have that option. And I do bring all of that stuff in a suitcase down to Antarctica. So I think when I was traveling with your teacher, she may have seen that my suitcase was heavier than everybody else's, but that's okay. And the microphones that I use are kind of your typical, let's call them rock and roll microphones. Anyone who's performing on stage uses them. They're called SM58s, and I can send all of my gear over to your teacher to share with you, at least links to it. But the reason those microphones are good, why I call them rock and roll microphones, is because you can throw them on the ground and they'll still work. They're very durable, they're hard to break, and that's why I travel with them, so that I can make sure that I have the equipment that I need.
Thank you, Paul. Anything more about it? Okay, thank you. We're excited to try that. We actually have a couple rooms that are smaller. Is it better to do it in a smaller room, like than a bigger room, sound-wise, where we don't have professional recording?
You know, Sherry, you bring up a very interesting point about audio in general, right? Because when we take a photograph, we don't have to think about the environment. We're just thinking about what we're seeing. But when you're recording audio, like, hold on one second. So when you're recording audio, sometimes people make noise, right? This is my dog, this is Kahlo, and when the mailman comes, he likes to bark. And if I am recording, that obviously is a problem. Bigger, but in the same way, Sherry, you asked big room versus small room. You have to think about echo, right? You are producing sound waves with your voice, and those waves are going forward. And those waves will bounce off of whatever your environment is. So if there's a high ceiling, it's going to sound different. If it's a small room, it's going to sound different. And, you know, you might think of me as a professional podcaster. In a way I am, but that doesn't mean that I'm not still recording in my closet. And the reason is because there's a lot of clothes in there. And what does that do to that echo that I just mentioned? It softens it. It brings it down. So as you're recording, you might not have the exact option to make it sound as nice as possible, but just keep in mind that some rooms might be better than others. Or even if you set up a small, like you hang like a jacket behind your microphone so that there's less bounce. I can write up a couple little tricks for you guys just to experiment with, but more importantly, just think about how audio works. You know, maybe you're on a hike and all of a sudden you hear an echo bounce off of the mountain. You know, sound is something that is always with us, but we don't give a lot of thought to. So as you're playing with the storytelling of sound, think about different ways that it might be able to be used.
Thank you. Okay, Brooklyn has another question.
On a regular basis, how long does it take to record, edit, and post the episode?
Ooh, that is a good question. So I have a team. My editor is in Buffalo, New York. My sound designer is in Chicago, Illinois, and I am in Portland, Oregon. It's hard to define an exact timeline, but I would say the recording is the easy part. The hard part comes in the edit. And that's me passing it off to my team. So every podcast takes a different amount of time. For instance, there's one podcast that we're working on that's about 40 minutes long right now. That's just going to take longer. There's another one that's 7 minutes long. So we're going to be able to turn that one out a little bit quicker. So it changes. But, you know, it's about what you want to get out of it. So you can spend as much time sort of combing over and trying to make it sound as nice as possible. But in the end, you have to think about who's listening to it and how much attention are they going to give to it. The reason why we put so much work into Meet the Ocean, why we add all the animal sounds, why we add the wind, the waves, the water, is because those are going to live online forever. So building that library of experiences of educational content is more important for me to pay attention to those details. So I think that what I do is going to have a longer timeline attached to it than what you guys are trying to do, which is probably good news.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, Alyssa has a question.
Wait, what do you use to find appropriate sound effects, and when in the podcast making process do you find/use them?
There are websites online, and again, I can send this over to your teacher to help you guys out, where sound effects are for free. And their quality varies, but it's free. So you get to sort of pick and choose. There's a lot of animal sounds online that are free, specifically birds. But those general sounds, like I said, a car driving by, or maybe like a cash register opening if you're interviewing a business, you can find those online. When do we choose to use them is a very interesting question, because you want a sound effect to inform the story, but you don't want it to dominate the story, right? You want the hand that's holding you through the journey is the voice of the storyteller. So that's going to be your most prominent sound that you're giving to the audience. Every effect, every little thing you might choose to put in there, you know, it's kind of like someone who's making a cake. The cake's already made, but the sound effects might be the icing on the cake, something that just adds to the flavor.
I love that point about not letting it dominate. Sometimes we get so excited about that part that it gets kind of crazy full instead of having it just be the icing. So, okay, Scarlett.
Okay, what do you do to end the podcast, or how do you write a good conclusion?
Good question. That depends on the subject matter. Because we are nature-based and education, conservation-based, I often try and turn the audience's mind to, you know, who are we? How are we doing? What's the state of our planet? And how can we learn more? You know, because we're a nonprofit, we're trying to build community. So giving people something to research, to an opportunity to learn more is a good way to end the podcast. Like, if you're interested in learning more, then go to this website. What's important for you as the storyteller, though, is then remember, where are we, who are we talking to, and why. So that why is going to be one of the most important parts of your ending, because if you're interviewing your community members, you want to speak to who they are, their strengths, how they inform the community. And in that outro, you can do that with 1 or 2 sentences. You know, the blank page is a scary thing. You know, if I'm trying to write a book, the blank page is a scary thing. Kind of the same thing with a podcast, but it doesn't have to be scary. But when you have those moments of like, what am I doing? Just go back to those questions. And I think the process of working through the stories is going to help inform your outro, because you might have one thought when you begin the whole process, but after a couple hours of spending time with the content, I think you'll be better suited to sort of tie that bow on the end to make sure that your story finishes nicely.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay, Adam.
You're welcome.
Hi.
Hey.
What is the best way to get people hooked?
What is the best way to get people hooked? Well, outside of what I do, I would say the podcast industry says consistent releases. But I almost disagree with that. I think there are some podcasters out there that are just like struggling to release a podcast almost every week because they think that that's going to keep their audience. But in my mind, that's just, you're affecting quality at that point. You might have a lot of podcasts, but the quality of them isn't going to be as good. So you want to make sure that your topics remain relevant. A lot of people have a great idea for a podcast, but then maybe after like 10 episodes, they don't know where to go. Obviously, you guys aren't trying to build your own podcast network or anything. You're just focusing on, again, that sacredness of storytelling. But if you ever do get to the point where you're like, I feel strongly about this, or I am interested in this, and you want to do an actual podcast about it, it's really just about being true to yourself and the content. So you want to sort of put the content up on a pedestal while creating the sort of, how do I want to say this? You know that smell when your parents are like baking a pie and it makes you want to walk down the hallway? That's what you're trying to do regardless of your subject matter. You want to get people's attention. You ask how to get someone hooked. Well, show them something new. Either a story they never heard before or a story that they have not heard told in a specific way. So the story of your town, the people who live in it, the people who work in it, that story has been told already, but it hasn't been told by you. And I think that uniqueness is what is going to help inform your guys' projects.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks.
Do you have time for one or two more? Do you have time for one or two more questions, Paul?
Oh, I have as much time as you guys have. Lay it on me.
Okay. All right, Malcolm, go for it.
How do you edit your podcast? What programs should we use to cut and edit the audio?
There is a free program called Audacity. And again, I'll send this over in some links to your teacher. Audacity is great for those just getting into the audio landscape. You might find some things intimidating, but let me tell you, when I was your age, Google didn't exist. There's nothing, there's nothing that you guys can't learn. The thing you have to learn though, and this is true outside of podcasting, this is just true for your lives in general, is learn how to ask a good question. Because if you know the questions to ask Google, you'll be able to navigate these programs very easily. You just have to be specific. So if you're running into a certain difficulty, think about how to ask Google that question, and I guarantee there's going to be some little YouTube video that's going to teach you how to do it. What I use is, you guys might know the Adobe suites like Photoshop and all that. So
we have Adobe.
Okay, so I do use Audition.
Audition. Okay.
Yeah, I find that program in terms of my expertise is way above my head. But I use it for something specific, which is just to put the audio in a single timeline, and then I hand it over to my editing team, and they're the experts who really make our podcast sound as good as it does. I'm the guy who's in charge of getting the interviews. I'm in charge of crafting the story, and then I make suggestions to them about sound effects and stuff like that. So it's not just me by any means, but Audition is what I use. And I think they use a couple other programs that, again, are too smart for my good. But that's okay. There's very, like, you guys are in a beautiful time in your life where no one expects you to be an expert right now. So you get to play and discover and find out what you're good at. So just take all the stress and anxiety and throw it out the window as you're exploring this, because what a great opportunity to just learn what a good story is.
I love also a point that you just brought out, but indirectly. Did you guys hear the team he has? You guys, there's different roles, and everyone's using their best talent. I don't know if I shared this with you, but Paul actually graduated in theater. And can you tell by his voice and the way he talks and shares that he understands, theatrics and drama and those things, that they're using his best talent, and maybe having him be the editor would not be the best place for Paul to be a part of this team. And so each of you have different skills, and I use your partner's best skills in the best places. You don't all have to do all of it. Assign jobs. Okay. Okay, one last quick question.
Thank you.
That was nice. We have 3 minutes before we got to take off, but Warner has one more question he just thought of.
When did you start working with National Geographic?
2013, and this was a very strange ask. Again, well, let's take this as a point. How do you tell the story? how do you tell your story? Because when you're applying for jobs, that's what you're doing. You're telling your story. I'm not a scientist. Like Sherry said, I have 2 plays published. I used to run my own theater company. And how does that all plug into National Geographic? Well, I told them that I like diving in cold water and I have a theater background. So they took a chance on me. They only hired me for 2 weeks initially. It was like a test to see if I could do the thing. And now it's been 7 years. So how you tell your story, not only in your podcast, but to people who are looking to employ you eventually, that's another power of storytelling.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
Well, I don't know if you remember when Leanne Abreu did a video of you all in your suits on the National Geographic Explorer. We actually watched that. The kids loved the very last question that she asked you. And if you can't remember what it was, I'll send you the video. It was
I actually
question.
I actually don't. I don't remember. So yeah, send it over.
Ellie, do you want to shout out what it was? Do you remember?
I'll do it.
Okay, Brennan, come tell them what the last question was. Okay, take your mask off again. You can hear you.
It was, do you ever have to pee in your suit?
Oh yeah, all the time, all the time.
That was definitely an interest hook for these kids. Yeah. Hey, Paul, thank you so much. I, like, from the bottom of my heart, I'm just so grateful that you're able to spend time with us today. We will send you our podcast when we get going and have produced some. And thank you for all this. I don't know if you can see, but I know I took a ton of notes. I think the kids did too. And we're ready to get going on podcasting. Thank you very much. Do you guys want to say thank you?
You're welcome. You're welcome. I did just finish a short film that we submitted to a London film festival. I'll send that over to you guys today so you can watch. It's only 5 minutes long.
We'd love it.
Lots of footage from Antarctica and other stuff in there, but also Sherry, I'll be in touch to just help you guys with some resources.
So, oh, thank you so much. All right. Well, thanks, guys.
Bye, guys.